Sarah, you may know Hal Beardall.
I sure do. Hi, Hal. Great to see you again.
Good to see you too.
So Hal is the director of the center that I used to be the director of when I was at FSU. So
we had a chance to work with Sarah recently down in Southwest Florida on some resiliency and a big giant, nice 250 member summit that we put on down there to develop some strategies for local governments to be using.
Noel, welcome. We're about to start. We're trying to kind of wait for a couple of the folks who are coming on. It's I think 1 after the hour, so we'll start in about a minute.
Hoping Sarah Raphael was going to join us too here.
That'd be great. Great to see him again as well. I have a feeling, Bob, people are going to take a minute to figure out that they can't get in on the old link and they're going to the new link. We've had that happen before, and like they just immediately say, oh, I can't get in. And then they check their email. So
yeah,
feeling that might be at play here for
you. We were trying to figure out whether we needed to we have phone numbers and we just figured we just couldn't get it done in time.
No, we all do that. We all panic and then we go and look at our email finally. pretty common in this day and age, virtually, right?
Yep. Okay. Welcome, Damon. Good to see you again. All right. I think we can, let's start, and we're going to do a brief introduction so we can get going here. So, all right. So welcome to the Florida Civic Advance webinar. We call them Third Thursday webinars. The 2023 series has featured several in the past. Our last webinar was focused on the University of Miami and their work in the community on civic scholarship. So we use these webinars to try and showcase civic excellence in Florida communities and elsewhere around the country. I'm Bob Jones. I'm the board member of the Florida Civic Advance, and we're a nonprofit 501c3 nonpartisan membership network. We're committed to working across sectors to improve and advance civic health in Florida's communities. So the next slide, the Civic Challenge has for about a decade been presented as one of the lowest states ranking relative to other states in terms of civic health. And civic health is a broad term that the National Conference on Citizenship describes in various ways in terms of volunteering rates, philanthropy rates, belonging to civic organizations, donating to charity, helping neighbors work and fix community problems, and attend public meetings. And we are not doing well in this regard in our state, and this has been the case for at least the past decade. And we want to change that. And the Florida Civic Advance is committed to engaging with both members and broadly with communities to see if we can bring some changes in the form of tools and other convening to improve this situation. This is a infographic, and the basic point of this is that we had relatively recently created the nonprofit in 22. We got our 501c3, but we were a program based at Florida State University from about 2014 to 2021. These are the ways in which our board has tried to kind of describe our strategic priorities. We are really interested and focused on trying to re-energize the civic health measurement that can go on as a tool in communities, and explore meaningful partnerships with national and state organizations in doing that. And we also convene and showcase civic excellence through webinars, through summits and the like. And you can get more information on this on our website. So one of the things to say is, in this conversation, we want you to utilize chat to place questions and also links and resources that you believe are relevant to the topic at hand. And so I think the other thing is that we're going to conclude at 1 p.m. We're recording this so we can share this on our website with people who might want to have been able to participate, but had conflicts and the like. So just to let you know that. So I have the pleasure of introducing several of our presenters. Sarah Owen is the president and CEO currently of the Collaboratory in Fort Myers. She's been an innovator in the nonprofit sector over the years, and she started at the community foundation that now is Collaboratory about 12 years ago. So she has been working through the original concept of the Southwest Florida Community Foundation to become Collaboratory. And she will speak at length about this model and concept. So she has a BA. So she had previous worked at a CEO at a community cooperative in Fort Myers. She's been very involved in the Southwest community and in the Fort Myers community over the years. And she also serves on the board as a board member of the Southwest Florida Economic Development Alliance. So she has been active in the philanthropic network, the Florida Philanthropic Network. She helped to chair an affinity group that expressly deals with community foundations across the state. And she had got her BA from Southern College and her master's from USF in education. And so we're very pleased that Sarah is going to present the concept here today for us. I'll just mention Patricia and Jessica. So Patricia is a Collaboratory board member, serves as that, and has served as that for a number of years. So she worked in the context of the transition. She's a nurse and a teacher and a healthcare provider, and serves as the nursing director for the Florida Department of Health for Hendry and Glades County. So really brings appreciation of rural perspective to the conversation. She's served in the past in several boards at the Lake Okeechobee Rural Health Network and a member of the Florida Rural Health Association. And Jessica Turner is recently, and you'll hear from her about this, but she's recently appointed the coordinator of the Bright Community Trust, and she coordinates regional efforts to improve the quality and availability of affordable housing. She has been a teacher and a principal in the school system, but has also been involved in the past in media relations, event planning, marketing, and business administration. So she brings a lot to the table. So I am going to print one more slide. So when we asked the registrants to say, what do you want to learn from the webinar today? This was the really brief, the who, what, and how. So in terms of the what is the model for collaboration, the role of local government, transition from a community foundation to a regional problem solver, pathways for starting community conversations, and future planning after Ian. So then the how is how to keep people engaged over time, strategies for breaking down silos, engaging people in urban and rural areas, how to mix traditional and online meaningful engagement, and addressing challenges of sustaining collaborations over time. So these were, and we shared these a couple of days back with the presenters, so they've been able to kind of get a sense of what you're looking for in terms of a learning moment for today. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Sarah will place her. Yeah, it's all yours, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Let me get it going here. There we go. Can you see it, Robert?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Thank you all so much for giving us this opportunity. I'm so honored to be joined by Pat and Jessica. We've got another team member on too, Noelle Casagrande, who leads our communications. So I'm really excited to share what we like to call an explanation session with you. And before I get going on the explanation session that really kind of shares our big idea, I want you to know that we do these at least once a week. We do them at least once a week virtually, and many times we do them many times a week. And we've been doing them at this pace for the last 2 years since we announced our big idea. So you might be thinking, what in the world would require, one, an hour-long webinar to talk about this, and the fact that we give these at least once a week and spend an hour on it every single week. We never take a break or a pause. Why couldn't we just send you an email or a piece of collateral material? Or you're thinking, certainly you announced this at some point and got the announcement out. Yes, but we've discovered, and we believe from the beginning, that this takes more intentionality. This whole idea that many of you ask about before the webinar, of like, how do you keep people engaged? Well, people can't be engaged if they don't know. We represent a region that has 1.5 million people in it across 5 counties that go from very wealthy coastal areas to the most rural. So the thing that we want to share with you today is what we're considering the greatest community problem-solving initiative in American history. So I want that to sink in for a minute, because usually the first reaction I get to that, even if you didn't say it out loud, is, well, who in the world do they think they are, that they would claim to be the greatest of anything, much less the greatest community problem-solving initiative in American history? And what I want to tell you about that, and we've got Pat, who's a board member, and Jessica, who's come along to play a significant role in this initiative, is we were asking ourselves that question: who in the world do we think that we are? We were asking ourselves that as the Southwest Florida Community Foundation. But more importantly, who in the world do we think we are? And who in the world does the community think they are? Are they stuck in the ordinary? Are they just getting used to problems never being solved? Or could we dream something much bigger? Could we cast a vision so big that people, all 1.5 million of them, would get involved to solve things together? Now, Bob mentioned this a little bit in our bios. Who were we? For nearly 50 years, we were the Southwest Florida Community Foundation. And for those of you that are familiar with community foundations, we were a pretty good one. We were proud of our work. In 2018, we moved into this space that you see here. We converted a 1920s train depot and added on an additional expansion of that, all around this idea of bringing people together and connecting people. We gave out millions of dollars in grants. We had hundreds of volunteers, and things were really going well. but we were still haunted with that question. Who in the world do we think we are? And who in the world do we think we could be? And how do we bring every single person in our region together to be something special? Part of this required a really big commitment on our part. And we decided we just don't want to be who we've always been. And the reason we decided that is we were dedicated to ending suffering and sorrow in our region. It's all about the people. It's all about people who each and every day need these problems to be solved, and they don't have forever. And in many cases in our communities, we've just gotten hypnotized into the idea that these problems are always going to be there. So as part of that, we knew that we needed to step up with a really big commitment. Our board, our organization, and we need to do it in a really big way, like a written in blood kind of way that would hold us accountable. So 2 years ago, we came out very publicly and made a commitment to our region. We said we are committed to coordinating the solving of all our region's social problems on an 18-year deadline. Well, I can tell you, this always gives people a pause as well. They think, are we reading this right? Every single problem? Yes, every single one. Hunger, homelessness, racism, literacy, you name a problem, we are committed to solving those. But not just as us as an organization, not in the way that maybe a community foundation of the past would look at it. When we say we mean our entire region, everyone working together and holding ourselves accountable to a deadline. The next question people ask me is, why 18 years? Well, 2 years ago, we said every baby born today, when we announced, what will their lives look like when they reach that kind of magical 18-year age? What will our region look like? What will the problems look like? Will it be a place that's thriving? Will they have been involved in what the future of Southwest Florida looks like? Now we've got 16 years to go. Why would we come out with something like this? If I told you everything was going great as the Southwest Florida Community Foundation, why would we be willing to be laughed at? Why would we be willing to have people think that maybe we lost our minds during COVID? Well, for over a decade, we have been deeply committed to data. And what we were seeing is the numbers weren't heading the right direction. We compared ourselves to both US and state levels around some of the largest problems that we're all experiencing in our community. Now, these are pre-COVID and pre-Hurricane Ian numbers. So stats like kids living below 200% of the poverty level in the US with pre-COVID was sitting at 44%. In the state, it was at 49.5%. And in just one of our counties in our 5-county region, that number was sitting at 55.9%. Wasn't something we were feeling good about. I can scroll through some of these things that we're all working on. Suicide, 13 per 100,000 in the US. At the state level, that number sat at 14. And here in one of our counties, 16.9%. Low food access, 22.4 in the US. Florida was sitting right at 25.7%. And here we were in Lee County at 38.2%. Again, pre-COVID numbers. We looked at things like depression. In the US, 17.9% of the population. Here in Florida, 16.5%. And then if we took a look at Lee County, 22.1%. Moms without prenatal care, with Pat Dobbins' background, this one really got to her. In the US, we were sitting at 22.5%. In the state of Florida, 28.3%. And in Lee County, 36.6%. And if I included our more rural communities, our numbers for our region would be even more astonishing. So we began to ask ourselves, wow, people here care. They're donating millions of dollars. They're volunteering. Our region is a very caring number. So what's going on here? What's missing? Well, one thing we identified right away is there was really no common goal. We really wanted to come out with a commitment that we could all get behind so that we could all be working on things together. And the other thing we identified is in so many of our community serving organizations, there's no deadlines. So solving these things can feel like they take forever, because they do. We lean heavily on a quote by Leonard Bernstein. To achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. So what's that secret sauce? Many of you in your questions before the webinar were like, well, how are they going to do this? What's the strategy around this? Well, I wish I had, 3 binders to show you, but we really didn't do it that way. We did some deep studying and we did some deep thinking around this, and we talked to a lot of people in the community, and we discovered, we think there's one big missing link that could make a very big difference, and that's coordination. We studied NASA for years. We were looking at some kind of massive coordinating effort that seemed impossible at the time. So what you see here is 1960s NASA, right? The National Aeronautics Space Administration for the US government. And what do you notice about this slide? Well, mostly a lot of white middle-aged guys, right? But what we were really looking at is, how were they able to take President John F. Kennedy's dream of getting a person to the moon and back in a decade and make it a reality? None of the technologies, nothing that was needed to get a person to the moon and back safely was in existence in this photo. So what is it that they did? And what we soon discovered is, NASA didn't actually build anything. They didn't make anything. If you look at all the components of the space program, the Apollo space program, NASA didn't make the rocket. They didn't make the lunar module that landed on the moon. They didn't make the spacesuits. Playtex did that. They didn't do any of the launch pad. That was Ingalls Iron Works. Universities and colleges like MIT came up with the communication systems and the technology. An aviation company created the capsule, and Hamilton Standard did the life support system. NASA didn't build any of this. But think about our own communities, all the different entities that we need to solve these problems. No one entity does everything. What NASA did is they coordinated. They coordinated 20,000 companies, universities, and institutions. So think of all the players in our communities that need to be coordinated to create change. When you look at those 20,000 companies, universities, and institutions, you realize that represented 400,000 full-time employees. At the time, NASA employed 36,000 full-time coordinators. We've got one coordinator working with us now, Jessica, joining us today. In NASA speak, that was one coordinator to every 10 problem solvers. But I can tell you, in our community and most communities across our nation, the number of coordinators solely responsible for coordinating a big idea, and in our region, it sat at 0. There was no one serving that role. This is the org chart from some of the early NASA days. Now, I don't show this to you to make your eyes bleed or for you to dig into it, but I want you to see that, in most of our companies and the organizations you represent, you've got some kind of organizational chart like this. I don't show you this as a power dynamic. I show you that one department needs to communicate with another. There's connecting lines. There's a hierarchy. There's accountability built in here. But if we took a look at the org chart for our communities, this is what we see. We see healthcare networks. We've got 4 community foundations in our region. We've got hundreds of private foundations, public foundations. We've got 4 United Ways serving Southwest Florida. We've got big nonprofits with a national presence who have satellite offices here. I say we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of small nonprofits doing community work. And when you look at our organizational chart, you see something much different. There's no one or nothing playing a coordinating role. I don't mean a controlling role. I mean a coordinating role. So this brings up some questions in your mind, I'm sure. You could say, okay, Sarah, great. I can make a common goal. I can think about a deadline. But is that really going to solve anything? Anybody can do that. And that's the question we ask ourselves too. What else do we need to have happen? If there's no goal, no deadline, no coordinating entity, and no consistency, meaning a lot of times leaders in our community come up with really big ideas, let's say like collaboratory. But if that leader leaves, how will that work carry on? It all kind of crumbles in on itself. I can tell you, I'm about to step down after 12 years at Collaboratory, and we are using this as an example that the work goes on. We put the things in place so that nothing stops and the momentum keeps going. In a community, a big idea can't be based on a leader and individual organization. It has to be brought into the full culture, so we're all working on this together. The next question people want to ask is, all right, which problem are you going to start with, right? Which one are we going to dive in? This happens a lot when I show data around specific problems in our community. People immediately say, we've got to do something about food access. But here's the reality. We can't solve problems one at a time. We've all tried to do it for hundreds of years. We tend to dive in and say, how will we solve literacy or mental health or poverty or diabetes? And we all point our efforts toward one problem and think we're going to be able to solve it. But here's the reality. We believe that all of these problems are very closely connected. A few years ago, our foundation really dove into what a lot of us would call a pillar or a priority around economic mobility. We thought if we solve for economic mobility, then things would be vastly better in our region. But what we quickly learned was, if we were going to solve for economic mobility, we're quickly in a new domain of taking a look at the strength of public schools. And then that takes us immediately to another domain of what's going on in early childhood education, because the public school can't be strong if the early childhood system isn't. Which brought us to that data point on maternal health. If women aren't having healthy pregnancies, then there's no way that their babies are entering early childhood education ready to learn, which impacts the strength of our public schools, that impacts economic mobility. And then as we look at the data point on maternal health, we saw, wow, substance abuse is a big factor there. And one of the biggest factors that took us into another whole domain was there's no public transportation for moms to get to substance abuse programs or to any of the appointments that they need. So suddenly we're focused on one problem, but we're seeing we're entangled in so many more. And we can dive in deeper if I just took one of those connections, the public school strength. For those of you really interested in civic engagement, you'll see that if we're going to strengthen the public schools, we know that we have to impact state mandates. How is the money getting spent? But what does that take? That takes voter engagement to change those mandates. That takes some level of grassroots organizing and community organizing. But the reality, those folks are working 3 or 4 jobs, and we're right back to economic mobility. We use some simple narratives to begin getting these points across. We really moved away from any kind of philanthropic jargon because we want everybody to be engaged. We want to be thinking of things they care about and showing them how they're connected to other things. I can't tell you how many times when I tell somebody who wants to support domestic violence, if they would invest in animal shelters to take on the pets of women entering the shelter, they seem shocked. They've never thought of that connection. So we're always looking at how these problems are connected and how we can solve them, not one at a time, but all together. One of our pilot projects was the Future Makers organization. It's a coalition. It's a network. It's not a 501c3. It's not an institution, but it's hundreds of partners from all different stakeholder groups that came together to solve for improving our workforce in Southwest Florida. Much of the work that we're doing now, we learned in this Future Makers Coalition, and I encourage you to go to futuremakerscoalition.com and to really dive in further, particularly for those of you that are looking for deeper information on the models that we're using. Based on what we learned with the Future Makers Coalition and how people working together can really move a goal, we established 2 new coalitions that directly came out of barriers that we found when we were trying to improve workforce. Future Makers could not improve our workforce much further in our community or make much more progress without taking a deep look at housing. Now we don't just have a Future Makers coordinator, but now we've stood up a coalition to address this housing issue, because we know without it, we can't make progress in workforce. And then health and wellness, and looking at all the social determinants of health. How did those things come into play? And this is where the hurricane had a big impact. After Ian hit, we had to set up branches and coordinated efforts in 8 more issues, 8 more community problems. And soon, all of these will be working synergistically together. We want to connect the coordinators of all of these branches and teams so that we can be solving all the problems together, not one at the time. Now, many of you ask about the model of our community foundation and how did that have to change? We realized if you come out with a big, bold idea, then you can't just keep operating in the way that you did before. We're deeply connected to our community foundation roots. We're still a community foundation. But what we had to set up was additional departments that really took a look at some of these ideas. We set up an entanglements department that's always looking at how the problems are connected and really working deeply with the new coordinators of the teams to take lessons learned from our first pilot project of Future Makers. We've also got a brainstorming department. This is much like the explanation sessions. We don't want brainstorming to just happen once. We just launched this with a regional-wide on the table process that got thousands of people coming together, talking about the community and how we can solve things together. And now these brainstorming conversations will be ongoing, just like the explanation sessions. The nurturing department is critically important because there's a big elephant in the room about communities working together. And that is, how do we build trust? How do we take care of each other? In the nonprofit sector, in the community problem-solving sector, there's a big issue with the scarcity mentality. There's lots of competition. There's not an abundance mindset. So how can we always be building trust in our community? You can't expect people to be engaged with you if they don't trust you. There's institutional healing that has to go on. There's racial healing. There's so many places that our region has to come together. And so we wanted to be intentional about this. We didn't want it just to be ignored. Much like NASA had to deal with the problem of gravity. They knew it was going to come up, so they had to solve for it. And that's what our nurturing department is trying to do. You're experiencing right now the explanation department. We plan to never have this department closed down because we think if people don't understand what we're trying to do and aren't invited in, there's no way to keep them engaged on an ongoing basis. We also have this physical space that we think is a great resource, but we never really call Collaboratory a place. We call it a place, a space, and a state of mind. Because you have to create these containers virtually, physically, where people can come together. Who's going to be the coordinator that holds space for all of these conversations? Who are going to be the people that go out into the community and make sure people keep pulling their chairs up to the table? Who are going to be the people that are collecting the data and showing the progress that we're making together on benchmarks? It may be an 18-year idea, but all along the way, we have to hold ourselves accountable and show progress. Now, I can tell you that Kat, Jessica, Noelle from my team understand that they are involved in the greatest community problem-solving initiative in American history, and they know it sounds crazy, but that's okay with us because we believe the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing because I really want to spend time with you and the rest of my team and those from the community hearing your question and answering them. So Bob, I'll turn it back over to you so you can lead us into the Q&A.
Okay, so we had thought about this in advance with Sarah and Jessica and Patricia, that what we can do is just open this up and try and take questions, and Noel can join in as well, that kind of relate to the model and how it works. Sarah, I wanted to ask you that when you came up with this model, did you have any around the country, did you have any other community foundations that were testing this model of approach?
I think community foundations around the country and around the world have been on the cutting edge of new ideas in communities. And so, we're always learning from our partner community foundations. We're always trying to think of how we can partner with them and how we can do things together. But we really went in here with the intention of creating a new context, meaning creating something that had not been created before. We know we're borrowing great ideas from all different kinds of models, community impact, community convening, all kinds of civic engagement models, but how we're putting them together and the way that we're doing it, we really wanted to push kind of on the edge of risk taking, and not in a self-indulgent way, Bob, but in this idea that we were restless and tired and not willing to just keep doing the same thing we've always been doing and getting the results that we were seeing with that data. When you make a commitment like this, it changes the way you operate. It changes the way you talk, you think. Our conversations are different here. I mean, I hear that clock ticking behind me all the time. So we've learned a lot from other community foundations, and hope that we continue to do so.
So Patricia, I wanted to kind of check in with you. You have a public health background, you're a nurse, and you serve rural communities. How is Collaboratory addressing, it's a 5-county, 1.5 million, but several of the counties are very rural. And how is it being unfolded and taking place in some rural communities?
Well, thank you, Bob. I worked out in Henry and Glades as the health officer, started as the nursing director and then the health officer. I would tell you, in the rural areas that I serve, trust of urban is not there. Urban comes and takes and then leaves, and that's how they perceive them. They don't accept rural for rural with its strengths and its challenges. So when the Collaboratory, and I was the only person that represented rural when we started this initiative. So one thing that Sarah did and the board did that, in my opinion, was brilliant. Let's really look at getting some local strategic board members that also could represent Henry and Glades County. That was brilliant. That can go back, they live there, they play there, and they work there. So that was a good idea. The other thing that we found was important is, they knew me, rural knows me. And like I was on a known face because I was there for so many years. So many times I've introduced people, and we've gone and we have done presentations to the Board of County Commissioners, to Rotary, to groups that gather and share what we are and what they're doing. They're still questioning it, but we keep coming back, and that's what they're looking for, is for someone to come back, someone to be strategic and accept them for what they am. Don't tell them what their problems are, they already know, but ask them how we could help. Is there anything we could do? So it's a humbler coming in there and not telling rural what we think they need. They can tell us what they need. So Sarah has been big, the board has been big. And Sarah, let me just say this as well. When we went to this whole initiative, Sarah had to take a look at her staff. Did we have the right players? Was the staff the right complement to take this whole vision forward? And she adapted that staff to make it the right people, the people who valued relationships. Relationships build trust, whether it's urban or rural. And you have to do that when you are talking any type of changes. So I think that was important for us, and it still is important that we keep coming back and we keep involving them and taking a look at their data and see what they want to do. Look at their housing issues, that it might not be the same as urban, but and there's things that they're doing that we need to applaud. So I think it's valuing the rural areas for being different and not judging.
So Jessica, you have just come on as a coalition coordinator as well as a housing coordinator, affordable housing. How do you see your job at this moment, and how does that relate to your work with the collaboratory and the broader vision of changing the world here?
Thanks so much, Bob. First, let me just say I'm so happy to be with you guys today and brag a little bit about something I'm really excited about. So my position was created in a partnership between Bright Community Trust, which is an organization that has a wealth of knowledge and experience about affordable housing, and with the Collaboratory, which has a wealth of knowledge about Southwest Florida. So knowing that affordable housing has been a problem in our community for so long, and it's just been exacerbated by the hurricane, knowing that existed, the two groups came together and they created my position as a coordinator for trying to improve the quality and availability of affordable housing in the area. So just like the Collaboratory has a bold goal, I have a bold goal with my group of partners as well. We're hoping that by the year 2040, that 80% of people in the 5-county area will be able to have access to housing and transportation that costs 45% or less of their income. And so that's how we fit in with the big, bold goal of the Collaboratory, is that is one of the biggest problems, and we are oriented towards action. So we have already had our coalition meetings. We've already formed into action teams, and then each of the action teams works to start pilot projects, and they figure out who are the most important stakeholders. What is the data? What does the picture of the problem look like right now? What is something we can do together to start to work towards solving those problems? And then if those pilot programs work, how can we scale them so they can affect positively more people? I'm just so excited to have this opportunity to join the Collaboratory and to be able to help the people in Southwest Florida.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Bob, I want to make one point there that I think is really important for the group. I want to point out one that Jessica works for Bright Community Trust, who is serving as the container and the backbone, but she has no expertise in housing. And that's important. What we're trying to form is these networks, right? So she's not a housing expert. She is a collaboration builder expert, and getting more expert by the day. It's this commitment to this coordination. She doesn't do anything for Bright Community Trust, right? She doesn't have 3 jobs and then she's coordinating this network on the side. Collaboratory is funding the ability for Bright to hire a coordinator, right? But Bright has to leave their housing expertise at the door. They're just a partner in the network, just like everybody else is. So this is that commitment to coordination and playing that role that no one else is playing. It'll never be a 501c3. It'll never be an institution. It will always be a network of partners working together to get to the goal while they do their singular work that they do well.
Okay, so we have some questions here, and I'd like to just pose those really quick, and then encourage anyone who wants to take their self off mute and ask a question to do so. So what is the primary funding source for Collaboratory is one question, and then what are some of the key collaborations that have occurred in the first 2 years, and how do you measure and or document progress towards your broader 18-year goal?
Great. I'll talk to this funding, and then Jessica, I'll let you talk about some of the collaborations that have spun up. So we are a community foundation. right? We have donor advised funds, field of interest funds. We are fundraisers. We do all the things that we did as a community foundation, but we're just doing them in a new context now around how we're doing this. So we fundraise, we write grants. I will tell you, for example, the Future Makers Coalition, for which we serve as the backbone, just recently partnered with the Florida Gulf Coast University and received a $23 million grant for their work. And the reason that we got it was this massive number of partners that we brought together to reach the goal around our workforce. So we do funding in the same way that community foundations have always done it, but now donors are being encouraged to come along with us to support the role of coordination rather than just program development. Okay. And then I'll let Jessica speak to some of the coalitions that have just begun to bubble up.
So first, Sarah brought up the Future Makers Coalition, and it's really important that that we understand they've existed a lot longer than the housing and the health and wellness coalitions. They've been around for about 8 years now, and they've been immensely successful. Sarah mentioned the grant that they received in conjunction with Florida Gulf Coast University. So we actually have gone through a training. Basically, we're learning how to collaborate. We're learning how to do collective leadership as opposed to traditional leadership examples. So one example with Future Makers, for instance, they are trying to increase the amount of people who have some sort of certificate or degree after high school. So they have action teams, and somebody had mentioned or had asked a question about how do you measure. That is the basis of everything we do, is data and measurement. So we know how many people in Southwest Florida don't have diplomas. We know how many people don't have certificates or any kind of college after high school. So what we have done, or what the Future Makers, I'm also a Future Maker, has done, is they create these action teams. So one example is a partnership with the technical colleges in the 5-county area. And they have really been able to move the needle by creating these partnerships and figuring out what the community needs, what the businesses need, and trying to fulfill those needs with programs that are started in the technical colleges. So I've seen data already where we've had an increase in nurses that have been trained and hired. We are hoping to have more paraprofessionals become teachers, or more community members become paraprofessionals to help, because there is a teacher shortage. So everything we do is based in data, and we use SMART goals for absolutely everything we do. The one example for the Housing Coalition, we have 3 action teams. One of them is the finance team, and everything that we do is based around data. So one of the indicators that I work towards is having 5% more affordable housing starts every single year over year. So one of the things that we're working on in the finance committee is having a group of people who mentor other developers and builders that come into the area, because building affordable housing, it's like a minefield. It's very confusing, all of the tax breaks and incentives and subsidies. So we have people who are willing to, instead of being competitive and that scarcity mindset, they're going to work together for the betterment of the whole community. And they are going to share the experience that they have in walking through the system and getting financing for affordable housing. So that's just an example of something the Future Makers has done, and something we in the Housing Coalition are working towards.
Great. There was a question coming in terms of registrants learning. What relationship does Collaboratory have to the various local governments and counties and cities in your region? And in that context, local governments have, for the last 30 years, been mandated to coordinate intergovernmentally, and it's widely seen as a failure in terms of what it means. It's sort of, they always would say while they're Xeroxing the comprehensive plan, they would write up the intergovernmental coordination element. So coordination is really central to your effort. And how are local governments participating in Collaboratory?
So I'll talk about it at a 30,000 foot level, and then Pat can weigh in from the board perspective and some things that we've done specifically around this, and then Jessica at the more coordinator level. So we knew immediately as soon as we made the announcement that we were going to have to find new ways to work with government. We believe that a lot of coordination happens when people trust you. They pull their chair up to the table when they trust you. And there was a lack of trust, much of what you just described, Bob, in kind of the government coordinating. But we knew that in good times and bad, that government is one of the biggest donors a community can have. For example, with Hurricane Ian, we have received an allocation from HUD of $1.1 billion. We've been asked to coordinate the recovery task force to help with that, because now we're seen as coordinators and bringing people together. We were asked by the government to play that role. But one of the first steps we made was we brought on to our team a consultant who is a public policy person. It's a former senator, very well respected from our area, that we recruited to help us with policy work and with lobbying at the state level. Because we understand that part of this is really having a deeper understanding of how those systems work. So Pat, do you kind of want to speak to the board's decision to make a move like that? And then Jessica, how you're seeing in the earliest stages of government coming around this housing piece of work. Pat?
Sure. I would say during this whole time, it's been very, very interesting. If you think that this board has been a yes board, you're nuts. This board is like every other board. You have people that are cautious to such a degree, and there are those that are ready to run. So it took a lot of conversation, and that's what we couldn't be afraid of. It was sitting down professionally and not throwing daggers, really talking pros and cons of the decision that Sarah was putting before us. When it was all said and done, it was, let's go forward. There will be something in that will benefit the region, and see if you keep that focus of what we're looking at as a regional growth, the regional Boulder board, then I think some of the decisions we make, the board makes to have Sarah to move forward on that whole idea has been positive. I think that's about all I have to say on that, Sarah.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
As far as the involvement of government, from my perspective, they are partners in the work that we are doing. So when the call for information came out and it was decided that the biggest problems that we wanted to start to tackle were education and workforce and health and wellness and housing insecurity, we invited all hundreds of partners to the table. And so, for instance, in the Housing Coalition, I have partners that work in veteran services who are passionate about trying to end homelessness for our veterans. I have people from the planning department and permitting department that are working because they are aware, just like the rest of the community, that there is a problem in how quickly permits are done for affordable housing. It's something that's really important and we need to expedite it. Something else, we know that transportation needs to be improved. And so I've got representatives from both the Collier and Lee County already who are involved in trying to improve the network of public transportation in our area. So they are partners just like nonprofits and contractors, developers, real estate agents, and we're all going to work together to try to solve these problems.
So Damon has presented a challenging question. So in terms of, you mentioned lobbying for Collaboratory in the context of the state legislature and policies, and as well as local government. And you're taking a very nonpartisan perspective in a very partisan climate. And how have you handled that, and what have you learned from that challenge?
Well, first, we don't shy away from it. This kind of goes to Pat's comment, when we had a conversation about it at the board level, anytime you're going to bring on somebody and say, we're going to do lobbying and we're going to do policy work, that can strike fear into Community Foundations Board and the organization as a whole. So our Southwest Florida region is extremely red. It's a concern, most of all of the electeds are red. The Senate president, all of them are primarily from a red perspective, right? So our job, we feel like, is to bring on someone like former Senator Elizabeth Benaquisto, who understands the inner workings of Tallahassee, will sit down with the guiding team of the coalition around workforce, find out what the policy challenges they've identified, and then begin opening up dialogue between us and those that can change the policy. So we center it around what's the policy issue. The coalitions raise the issues that they've found. We've got some in housing right now around permitting. And what a person that's dedicated and understands the inner working of both local and state government, they're able to help us navigate those conversations. They're able to introduce us to the staff members, that the coalition needs to talk to. So we're not coming as an individual organization. We're not coming as collaboratory. We're coming as, here's a coalition who's trying to reach a goal. And here are 3 policies that if we made an adjustment there, what we get to show them is the progress of the things that they care about. There isn't a legislator in our region that is not super focused on workforce and what are we going to do about the future of workforce. So we go in saying, hey, we've noticed that if we could make this policy change around how people receive AAs and how they're recognized right at the state level and state universities, we could increase the number of degrees. So we've got all the data. We go armed with data, and then we let the relationship builders help us navigate that. And then, of course, we follow all the regulations and rules about the percentage of lobbying and how much policy work and that kind of thing that we do. So we build this the way we build everything, building relationships, keeping centered on the issue, not the organization, because our networks represent hundreds of organizations and individuals, and using that as our guide. Okay,
so we're approaching the hour, and there was one question, and if you can offer a brief response to this question, but it's a very an interesting and compelling question, is as a community advocate in another jurisdiction in Florida, what can counties learn from this experience in Collaboratory, and what that they can apply to their local context, to community foundations, to local government, et cetera?
I think every single community in America is trying to figure out how to solve the problems once and for all. I don't think anybody works in community and says, well, I hope none of these problems get solved. So I think the very first thing is to take away the bold thinking, the risk-taking thinking, just examining, wait, are we doing things like we've always done them? Are we examining who do we think we are? There's no one size fits all to anything. We invite anybody to come. We make failure after failure after failure. We're willing to share those kind of things. But I think it takes the dream first. Like, what is it that you're dreaming about first? And organizing up to it is more important than any of the tactical. All the tactical will come. So I just say, dream big, come visit, and we'll learn from each other.
Yeah. Okay, this is a really great conversation, really, really helpful information and thoughts in terms of how we can think about what's going on in Southwest Florida, and also think about its potential applications in or replications in other parts of the state. I thought the central core, you mentioned a one coordinator for every 10, call them engineers, scientists, et cetera, in the NASA example. Imagine if you had one coordinator for 10, even the thousands of organizations around the region. So I think coordination is a really key thing, but it's also a very stale concept, at least in terms of how it's been applied over the past 3 or 4 decades in Florida communities. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, for your service and work, and we wish you luck in the future. And hopefully you will stay in Southwest Florida and help guide this further, not in a formal role. And then Patricia and Jessica, really thank you so much for the opportunity to learn about this. I have just a couple of slides. We welcome membership in the Florida Civic Advance. You can see it on our website. The next program that we're planning is a program that's out of Lexington, Kentucky, and it's blending civic engagement with local journalism. And it's been kind of highlighted. It was at a Knight Foundation Media Forum a couple of months back in Miami, and we're going to try and learn from this initiative. They've been about 5 years in the works. Then we have videos of our past webinars going back to February of 22, and this is information. And then finally, we want to just sort of save the date, and we're going to be sending out soon a lot more information than this. But we're having a in-person Florida Civic Advance Summit. The last one we had was in December 2019. Right before COVID hit. And it's going to be Thursday and Friday, October 26th, 27th, at the Center for Health Equity in St. Petersburg. And registration will be coming soon. So I just want you to make a note, and we'll get information about that to everyone who's registering for these sites. So again, thank you so much. We could have spent another hour trying to delve deeper and to understand the interesting challenge that you have set for yourself in terms of this goal. But thank you so much for doing that, and we will continue to pay attention to the results of this effort going forward. Thank you again, and we're going to conclude this session of the webinar, and have a great day.